Alright, so here's my defense against certain statements regarding my claims. Alright, so first of all, I'm going to go over the subject that access to guns does not necessarily cause an increase in violence in the United States. I'm going to go back to that one. So one attack that my opponent made was that for background checks, since 1994, background checks were implemented. She proposed that that's one of the possible ways for gun rates to have possibly gone down. But as I said earlier, that according to a special issue on the prevention of gun violence, which is written by an annual research journal titled Preventive Medicine, we can go back to that statistic that almost 90% of inmates who had a weapon in possession during their crime purchased a gun through their social connections. This statistic is incredibly important because it just goes to show that background checks aren't necessarily effective whatsoever regarding crime, and that it pretty much only affects gun owners who already abide the law. Now, when you look at these background checks, you'll notice that. Wait, no, that's not. Alright, so I'm just gonna skip that part. That's not necessarily where I was going to go, but another point that my opponent made was that the United States having a proportionally higher number of gun violence, she compared the United States to countries such as Mexico and India, in which they have higher crime rates as well. But the United States one, it just happens to pop out a little bit more. So one case that I want to use is that in the case of Mexico, the violence crime rate is also higher, but Mexico also has a lower amount of legally registered weapons. They only have 0.13 legally registered guns per person, whereas in the United States we have 1.45 guns per person that are legally registered. And so this just goes to show that even with legal registration and processes for background checks, it doesn't necessarily stop violent crimes related to firearms. Further, one statement that was made is that many guns used in crime were originally sold legally, and then they were eventually sold or given away privately. I'm going to use the affirmative source for this one, which is from gunfacts.info, where one study of adult offenders living in Chicago or nearby determined that criminals mostly do obtain their guns through personal connections or social networks. Again, this is just to back up that claim that criminals necessarily, they usually choose to ignore laws, hence why they are criminals. So we can only conclude that since they're still able to do that without proper documentation, Prop 63 would just be largely inefficient. So one thing that I'd like to point out to back up my claim is that California also implemented newer gun control laws prior to Proposition 63, and one of them had to do with assault weapons being banned, and it was mostly due to like aesthetics, such as what the assault weapons had, such as grips or stocks or anything like that. But again, we'd like to go back to the fact that with proper skill, any weapon can be modified back to how it originally was. And one case I like to use for assault weapons is that weapons such as the AR-15, there's some certain schematics that make it so it's semi-automatic, but there's also instructions inside that allow you to make it an automatic weapon again, but it specifically says not to do that. So when we look at the case of criminals, what happens is they usually choose to ignore these laws, and such is the case with San Bernardino, where large mass shootings happen in the state of California, which also has one of the largest, one of the most strict gun control laws in the country.